Welcome to True Echo, where real moments meet unbelievable twists. In today's story, a simple act of kindness on a dusty road unravels a secret so powerful it shakes the foundations of one of America's wealthiest families. A 14-year-old black girl, a broken-down Mustang, and a mysterious ruby ring hidden in plain sight. What begins as an engine fix becomes a journey into forgotten promises, stolen lives, and the return of a truth too powerful to remain buried. Stay with us. The late afternoon sun poured down like molten gold across the dusty stretch of County Road 16, just outside the forgotten edges of upstate New York. Amara Collins, a 14-year-old black schoolgirl with sun-kissed skin and quiet eyes, was walking the long way home. Her uniform shirt clung to her back in the heat, her backpack, faded, patched and fraying, thumped gently with each step. Inside that worn canvas bag, nestled among her textbooks, was a small, weathered mechanic's toolkit wrapped in a strip of cloth once belonging to her late Uncle Matthew. That toolkit was more than a set of tools. It was a legacy. Uncle Matthew had run the only garage in the nearby town and was more father to her than anyone else in her life. He taught her not just how to fix things but how to listen, to engines, to silence, to lies. You can learn more from a stalling engine than from a shouting man, he'd once told her. Engines don't lie. The road was empty, save for the chirping of cicadas and the occasional rustle of wind through the dry brush. That's when she saw it. A sleek, black Mustang GT sat like a misplaced beast on the side of the road. Its hood was popped, steam curling from the engine like a ghost escaping its cage. Beside it, a sharply dressed white man in a custom-tailored Italian suit paced with frustration, barking into his phone. "I don't care what the meeting is. I'm stranded in the middle of nowhere, and your top mechanics say it'll take 2 hours. His voice was clipped, high-strung, used to being obeyed. "No, you listen. This is a $100,000 car. I'm not leaving it to rust on a gravel road." Amara stayed a respectful distance away, just as her uncle taught her. Observe first. Approach second. Speak third. She watched him slam the phone into his pocket and bend over the engine like he could intimidate it into submission. Then, without waiting for permission, she stepped forward. "Sir," she said gently, "it looks like your car's leaking coolant. Probably the radiator hose. You can smell the glycol, it's got that sweet, syrupy smell." He looked up. First surprise. Then skepticism. Then something colder. His eyes scanned her, brown skin, school uniform wrinkled from a long day, cheap sneakers, hair tied in a neat bun. "This isn't a toy, kid," he said, waving her off. "Go home." Amara didn't flinch. She simply shrugged and crouched beside the front of the Mustang, peering under the hood. "I know it's not. But that leak means your engine's going to overheat if it hasn't already," I said. She unzipped her backpack calmly, revealing her roll of duct tape, small clamps and sealant. "I'm not here to mess it up. Just to help." He paused. This wasn't just some meddling teenager. The way she moved, how her fingers brushed the hose, how her eyes didn't dart around nervously, this girl knew what she was doing. "Who taught you?" he asked, cautious now. "Uncle Matthew," she replied, not looking up. "He was a mechanic before he passed. Left me his tools. Taught me everything. Said knowledge without action is a waste." The man blinked. Her voice wasn't confrontational. It was steady. Matter of fact. She cut a strip of tape with precision, cleaned the area with a rag, and applied the sealant in swift, practiced motions. "This isn't a full fix," she said. "But it'll hold until you reach the nearest town." He crouched beside her, watching. Something about her triggered something. Nostalgic maybe, maybe more. "What's your name?" he asked. "Amara," she said, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Amara Collins." He extended his hand slowly, unsure why. "Chris Reynolds." Their hands met. And that's when he saw it. On her left ring finger, far too large for her hand and tied tight with black thread to keep it in place, gleamed a deep red ruby ring. The sunlight struck it just right, and the glow flashed across his face like lightning. Chris recoiled slightly, not out of fear but memory. That ring wasn't random. It was familiar. Haunting. He stared at her hand, then up at her face, his heart beginning to race. "That ring?" he whispered, unable to look away. "Where did you get it?" Amara looked down at it, then back at him. "It was my mother's. She said it was a promise from someone she trusted. She died last year." Chris felt the blood drain from his face. It wasn't just the ring. It was the ring. A one-of-a-kind ruby set in an intricate gold vine, the band forming a subtle O when seen from the side. The same ring he had given to a child named Lily 15 years ago, in a place called Sunshine Children's Home. No one was supposed to know about that place. Certainly not a girl like Amara Collins. His chest tightened. Could it be? He studied her eyes, dark, steady but hiding something deep. Your mother, he said carefully, was she Sarah Collins? Amara's gaze changed. Not with recognition but with wariness. Yes, she said slowly. How do you know that name? Chris didn't answer. He couldn't. His heart was thudding. In his mind, fragments of the past flooded in: childhood visits, his mother's secret tears, his father's hushed phone calls. The orphanage. The girl. The ring. It all came back. And suddenly, Chris knew something he hadn't known 5 minutes ago. This girl wasn't just a mechanic's niece with a sharp mind. She was a ghost from the past. A buried promise. And possibly, most dangerously, the key to everything his father, Richard Reynolds, had spent a fortune to erase. Chris stood frozen, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the Mustang's hood, the other still tingling from the handshake. Amara had already returned to adjusting the radiator cap, oblivious to the chaos unfurling behind his polished eyes. He stared at the ring again. The ruby gleamed like a drop of blood under the fading sun. Do you know anything else about where your mom got that ring? He asked, his voice unusually quiet. Amara glanced at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. She wasn't stupid, she could feel the shift in his tone. Not much, she said carefully. She just told me it was a promise. Something special. She never took it off. Gave it to me the night before she died. Chris felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. His mind screamed for logic. There's no way. It can't be her. It's just a coincidence. But he knew better. The ring had been his. He'd taken it from the Reynolds family vault in defiance, a symbol of rebellion. His father had tried to groom him into a ruthless successor, and during one of their charity photo-op visits to the Sunshine Children's Home, Chris had met Lily, a 5-year-old girl with sorrowful eyes and a laugh that felt like sunlight in a concrete room. He'd promised her he'd come back. Promised with a ring. And then he hadn't. Sunshine had been shut down weeks later. Your mother? He tried again. Did she ever mention a place called Sunshine? Amara paused. She didn't turn around immediately, but Chris saw her shoulders tense. Then slowly she stood. She mentioned it once, she said. I overheard her crying one night when I was supposed to be asleep. She said Sunshine was never safe, and that she had to run. That if she hadn't taken me I wouldn't be alive. Chris's throat tightened. It wasn't just her sharp intuition. Not just the ring. It was her name. Amara Collins. Sarah Collins had been one of the nurses at Sunshine. And Lily, her file hadn't listed a last name. Just her first. She'd been one of the undocumented ones. Untraceable, his father had said at the time. That had been the point. Chris had always suspected something darker lurked behind the Sunshine program. But when he'd questioned his father about the orphanage's sudden closure, Richard Reynolds had dismissed it with cold efficiency. Temporary facility. Shut down for liability. Unnecessary to revisit, he'd said, the way one might speak about an investment that didn't perform well. But now that past had returned. And she was standing right in front of him. I think I can drive now, Chris said abruptly, backing away from the engine. You fixed it better than any of my tech guys could. Amara wiped her hands again, expression unreadable. You're welcome. Can I give you a ride home? She hesitated. I usually walk. It's not far. Please, he said, surprising himself with the softness in his voice. Let me. After a moment she nodded. They rode in silence, the only sound being the soft purr of the Mustang engine, reborn under her hands. Chris couldn't stop glancing over at her, at the calm with which she sat, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes watching the fading sky through the passenger window. Not nervous, not impressed by his car or his expensive watch. Just still. When they pulled up outside a modest apartment complex at the edge of the town, Amara unbuckled her seatbelt and reached for the door. Amara, he said suddenly. She turned back. If you ever find anything else about your mother, about where you came from, will you let me know? Her brows drew together slightly. Why? Chris hesitated, then said honestly, because I think I knew her once. A long time ago. And I think you're connected to something much bigger than either of us ever expected. Amara studied him, the faintest trace of doubt flickering in her eyes. But then she nodded once. I'll think about it. And with that she closed the door. Chris sat there watching her disappear behind the iron gate. His heart pounded with something more than nerves, fear. Because if he was right, then his father already knew she was alive. And if Richard Reynolds knew that Lily was still breathing, still walking, still talking, She was in grave danger. Chris reached into the glove compartment and pulled out an old folder, the one he'd kept hidden even from his mother, Olivia. Inside was the only surviving photograph he had taken from Sunshine before it vanished. A picture of him holding a little girl's hand. A girl with Amara's eyes. His phone buzzed suddenly. A message. From an unknown number. She has the ring. That changes everything. Watch your next move, Christopher. No name. No location. Just the reminder, you were never the only one watching. Chris leaned back in his seat. This wasn't just about a promise anymore. This was about truth, power, blood, and an empire that had built itself on stolen children, now facing the one girl they could never erase. That night, Amara sat in her small room beneath the slanted ceiling of the third-floor apartment she shared with Uncle Matthew. The pale moonlight leaked in through the worn blinds, casting thin silver lines across the hardwood floor. On her desk, next to her open schoolbooks and her carefully cleaned toolkit, sat the ruby ring. She held it between her fingers, turning it slowly. The gemstone shimmered, dark and deep as blood. Her mother's ring. Her inheritance. It had always felt important. Sacred even. But until today it was just a link to a mother who was no longer here. Now it was something else. A key maybe. Or a target. Chris Reynolds had known the ring. Not just noticed it, recognized it. That haunted look in his eyes hadn't come from seeing a piece of jewelry. It had come from memory. From guilt. She'd seen that look before, in Uncle Matthew's face the night her mother died, when he told Amara there were things better left in the past. But Amara didn't want the past to stay buried anymore. Downstairs, she heard the door open and Uncle Matthew's boots thudding across the linoleum floor. She pocketed the ring and headed down. Matthew looked up as she came into the kitchen, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He always smelled like motor oil and pine soap. He was built like an old tree, solid, scarred, dependable. "You're late," he said, not harshly, just observant. "Help someone fix a car," Amara replied, grabbing a glass of water. Matthew raised an eyebrow. "Someone important?" "Maybe. His name's Chris Reynolds." Matthew froze. His hand stopped mid-wipe. Then very slowly he sat down at the kitchen table. "Reynolds?" he repeated as if tasting the name. Amara nodded. He recognized Mom's ring. Matthew didn't speak for a while. Just stared at the floor like it was made of something far more dangerous than linoleum. "He asked me if Mom worked at a place called Sunshine," Amara continued. "Did she?" Matthew exhaled sharply. "She did. A long time ago. You never told me. We never thought you'd need to know." Amara stepped closer. "Why not?" Matthew looked up and his eyes, normally so calm, were clouded with something heavy. "Because Sunshine wasn't what it claimed to be. And Sarah, she didn't just leave. She ran. With you." Silence filled the room. "Ran from what?" Amara whispered. Matthew rubbed his temples. "They said it was an orphanage. But it was more like a holding facility. Kids came and went, but not like they were being adopted. There were no records. No paperwork. No questions. And I was one of them?" Matthew nodded. "Sarah didn't birth you, Amara. But she raised you like her own. She used to be a nurse there. She started asking questions. Noticed how some children were always monitored, tagged. Especially you." Amara sat slowly, heart pounding. "Then one night," Matthew said, "she took you and disappeared. Told me later she'd faked paperwork, altered files. Said if anyone found out, they'd come for her. Or you. Or both." Amara pulled the ring from her pocket and placed it on the table. "There's more," she said. "Chris said he thinks I'm part of something bigger." Matthew scoffed, but it lacked humor. "I'd believe it. I knew there was something twisted about that place. And I know who Richard Reynolds is." Amara's blood turned cold. "You think he knows I'm alive?" Matthew looked at her, his eyes grave. "If Chris recognized that ring, Richard probably will too. And he won't want you walking around with it." Amara suddenly felt very, very small. That night, after Uncle Matthew went to bed, Amara sat alone in her room with the ring resting in her palm. She thought about Sarah, her smile, her stories, her fierce protection. She remembered something else. A time she'd seen her mother crying over a leather-bound journal and whispering something she couldn't quite hear. Amara opened the old wooden drawer in her desk and pulled the journal out. Its leather cover was cracked and the pages were yellowing. She hadn't dared open it since Sarah died. But tonight she had to. Her fingers flipped through the entries, mostly thoughts, quotes, small drawings, until she reached the last few pages. And there it was. A single line written hastily in shaky handwriting. "They'll never stop. But the ring is the key. And the key holds more than they know. Amara blinked. What did that mean? She picked up the ring again, inspecting it more carefully. Her fingers twisted the ruby, almost absent-mindedly. Click. Something moved. She froze. The ring popped open. Inside was a tiny hidden compartment, and nestled within it was a clear, round object smaller than a fingernail. A microfilm disc. Amara's breath caught in her throat. She carefully removed it and held it up to the light. This wasn't just her mother's ring. It was evidence. Downstairs, she heard Matthew moving and quickly slid the ring back together, tucking the disc into her school bag. The next day after school, she told Matthew everything, and they drove to the only place in town with an old microfilm reader, the back room of the county library. As the screen flickered to life, static gave way to lines of text. Then documents, records, names, and finally, one file that made them both go pale. Project Gemini. Subject, Lily Sullivan. Status, Phase 2, transfer denied. Note, ring delivered by Seer, Guardian Collins, Sarah. Location unknown. Twin status, Elizabeth Sullivan, asset acquired. Memory alteration complete. Matthew leaned back in his chair. Twin, he murmured. Amara stared at the screen. She wasn't just someone's project. She was part of something else. And someone out there, her twin, had been taken. Her name was Elizabeth. Her file said, asset acquired. But by who? Amara clenched her fists. This wasn't just about her past anymore. This was about someone else still trapped in the same shadow she had barely escaped. I have to find her, she said aloud. Matthew looked at her, quiet for a long time. Then nodded. Then we start with the one man who knew about the ring. Chris. No, Matthew said. His father. In the penthouse office atop Reynolds Tower, Christopher Reynolds sat in the dark, staring at the dusty Polaroid on his desk, the one he'd taken 15 years ago at the Sunshine Children's Home. In it, a younger version of himself smiled awkwardly as a little black girl clung to his hand. Her name had been Lily. Now he knew, Lily hadn't vanished. She was alive. She was Amara Collins. And she had no idea what she was standing in the middle of. Chris opened his encrypted file drive and began pulling up the documents he'd stolen years ago from his father's vault. Names. Project files. Payment logs to non-profits that were just covers. Medical research forms with children's names listed as samples. And then the one that chilled him most. Subject, Sullivan Elizabeth. Status, memory altered/assigned to Huntington branch. Asset type, Shadow Heir. Authorized by R. Reynolds. Chris exhaled, his hands trembling slightly. Elizabeth. There really were two. One was missing. The other had been assigned to the Huntington branch. The thought struck him like a bolt of electricity. Victoria. Victoria Huntington, his fiancée. It all made sense now. Her vague backstory. The curated identity. Her unexplained access to private board meetings long before they were engaged. The time she steered him away from asking questions about Sunshine. He grabbed his phone and dialed her. Victoria, he said the moment she answered. Come to my apartment. No. No excuses. She paused on the other end. You found it, didn't you? Chris froze. Found what? The ring, she said quietly. And the girl. Her voice wasn't shocked. It was resigned. I'll be there in 30 minutes. She hung up before he could ask anything else. Chris stood up, stormed to the liquor cabinet, and poured a glass of water instead of scotch. He needed clarity now, not numbed nerves. 31 minutes later, the elevator dinged. Victoria entered, dressed in a gray wool coat, her hair pulled back tight. No makeup. No pressed smile. She looked like someone on her way to court. Sit down, Chris said sharply. I'd rather stand. He held up the Project Gemini file with her name on it. What is this? She walked past him, opened a book on his shelf, and pulled out an envelope he didn't know was hidden there. Inside, she handed him a photo, 2 baby girls in a hospital crib, their arms touching with identical red ID bands. On the back in faded ink, Lily and Elizabeth, 4 days old. That's us, Victoria whispered. You're sisters. Chris's legs nearly gave out. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't know, at least not at first. They raised me as Elizabeth Huntington. It wasn't until I saw Amara, Lily, on the footage from your car's dash cam that I started remembering. You remember her? Chris asked, his voice raw. Not everything, she said. Just flashes. Her laugh. The way she held my hand when the nurses came. And my father? He orchestrated all of it. Project Gemini was his contingency plan. 2 girls, One for control, one for leverage. I was the shadow heir. She was supposed to disappear. Chris dropped into the chair, speechless. And you went along with this? Victoria's jaw tightened. I didn't know until I was already inside the system. You think I wanted this? They trained me to manipulate you to keep you loyal. But seeing Amara changed everything. Chris stared at her. You want to help now? He asked. Then prove it. She nodded, reached into her coat and handed him a small flash drive. It's all there, she said. Documents, footage, medical scans, names of board members who funded Sunshine. Richard's voice on tape confirming he ordered Sarah Collins's surveillance. Chris took it, hands shaking. Why now? He asked. Because I remember who I am, she whispered. And because I've watched you search for the truth even when it could ruin you. Now I'm ready to ruin him. A long silence fell. Then Chris looked up. We need a plan. That same night, miles away, Amara sat cross-legged on the floor beside Matthew in the back room of his garage, the microfilm still glowing faintly on the reader. They'd written down everything, project numbers, names, even old GPS coordinates. One file stood out. Asset, Sullivan Elizabeth. Assigned to Huntington Family Trust. Cover identity, V. Huntington. Current status, engaged to primary heir C. Reynolds. Amara felt like the wind had been knocked out of her. Victoria. The cold, poised woman on magazine covers with Chris. Her sister. She's part of it? Amara whispered. Matthew's voice was low. Or she was. Until now. A loud knock interrupted them. Chris stood at the door. Amara's eyes narrowed. You followed us? I remembered something, he said. About the ring. About a promise I made to someone I loved. Someone named Lily. She didn't move. Chris stepped forward, slowly. I think you're her. And I think Victoria, Elizabeth, is your twin. The silence was complete. Then Amara stepped aside and let him in. They sat around the workbench, lit only by the flickering fluorescent light above. Chris laid out the plan. They're going to announce the Sunshine Plaza project in 2 weeks. Huge press event. Livestream. Global coverage. That's when we go public. With what? Amara asked. Chris placed the flash drive between them. Everything. Amara looked at it like it was a bomb. In many ways it was. Will she be there? She asked. Chris nodded. Elizabeth will walk out with you. She wants to. Matthew leaned back, arms crossed. You're playing with fire. Chris looked him in the eye. We're burning the whole empire down. Amara stood, took the ring off her finger and placed it on the workbench. No more symbols, she said. Let's give them something real to fear. The sun rose behind the Reynolds Corporation skyscraper like a spotlight, casting long shadows over Manhattan's steel towers. But inside the press conference hall on the 43rd floor, the air was sharper than the wind outside, charged, tense, waiting. This was the day Richard Reynolds had been building toward for years, the official unveiling of Sunshine Plaza, the crown jewel of his legacy, a megacity in a city project that promised hope, innovation, and humanity. Behind the sleek branding, however, a darker history pulsed just beneath the surface. And 3 of the people in the room knew exactly what it was. Chris stood near the podium, straightening his navy blue suit. He could feel the eyes of his father's advisors watching, measuring. He could feel the weight of everything they were about to do pressing against his chest. At the far end of the stage stood Victoria. No, Elizabeth, her hair swept into a simple bun, her eyes hard, chin high. No more pretending. No more cold socialite mask. Today she stood as herself, twin to the girl whose very existence had been erased. And that girl, Amara, stood just behind the stage curtain. She wore a simple white blouse, a gray school skirt, and the same sneakers that had once kicked dust beside a broken Mustang GT. Her curls were tied neatly back, and the ruby ring was no longer on her finger. In its place was a thin silver band, a new symbol not of ownership or legacy but of choice. Matthew stood beside her, disguised among the tech crew, a small transmitter earpiece tucked under his cap. Olivia Reynolds, seated in the front row, gripped a folded handkerchief like a lifeline. Sarah Collins, Amara's adoptive mother, waited in the wings with a stack of sealed evidence and one photograph, 2 baby girls side by side in a crib. The hall was packed. Press, politicians, international investors, shareholders. Every major news network had a camera rolling. And in the front row, flanked by 2 silent bodyguards, sat Richard Reynolds himself. Gray-haired, still broad-shouldered, with the calm confidence of a man who believed the world was a chessboard, and he the only player who mattered. The lights dimmed. The announcer's voice echoed through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sunshine Plaza Global Launch." Chris stepped up to the podium. He took a long breath, then began. "Good morning. My name is Christopher Reynolds, and I stand before you as the Chief Development Officer of the Reynolds Corporation. Today I was supposed to present a future built on progress." He paused. "But I can no longer speak of progress when I know it's been paid for in silence, suffering, and stolen lives." The room shifted. Whispers. Camera flashes. Confusion. Chris continued, stronger now. 15 years ago, a facility known as Sunshine Children's Home was shut down. It was said to be an orphanage. It wasn't. It was a breeding ground for a genetic legacy project called Gemini, authorized by this corporation, by this board. He turned to glance at the stunned executives, and by my own father, Richard Reynolds. The LED screen behind him flickered to life. Photos. Documents. Scans. One by one, the truths that had been buried for over a decade were dragged into the light. A scan memo. Transfer subject. Lily Sullivan, Phase 2 deferred. A payment log. $250,000 to Huntington Trust. Memo. Memory alteration. Subject Elizabeth. A surveillance image. 2 small girls in a room labeled Sunshine Genetics Division. The audience gasped. Chris stepped aside. And then from behind the curtain they stepped out. Amara walked forward first, followed by Elizabeth. The silver rings on their fingers glinted under the spotlights. The camera surged forward. Chris's voice returned, now steadier than ever. "These are my sisters. Not assets. Not products. Not contingencies. People." The room exploded in chaos. Some reporters shouted over each other. Flashes lit up the walls. The mayor stood up from his seat, stunned. And Richard Reynolds. He didn't move. He sat still like a man watching a mountain collapse in slow motion. Amara approached the microphone. Her hands were calm. Her voice was not shaking. "My name is Amara Lily Collins. I'm not a ghost. I'm not a theory. I am the child you all tried to forget. My mother, Sarah Collins, saved me. My uncle protected me. And I'm here today to say, your silence ends now." Elizabeth stepped up beside her, holding up a DNA test envelope. "2 matching results," she said. "One from me. One from her. Both daughters of Olivia Reynolds. Both victims of a plan meant to erase us." And then Olivia Reynolds rose from the front row. She joined them on stage and took the microphone. "I was forced to sign my daughter's death certificate while sedated in a hospital bed. I was told to forget. But today I choose to remember." Her voice broke. The room didn't move. Chris returned to the microphone. "There will be no Sunshine Plaza." Another pause. "All Reynolds Corporation assets related to Project Gemini will be transferred to an independent child welfare organization, the Sunshine Memorial Foundation, to provide care, shelter, and reparations to every survivor of state negligence and institutional abuse." Amara raised a photo of her mother and whispered, "For every child who was told they didn't matter, you do." Then came the final image on the screen. A manila folder labeled in red. "Project Gemini, Phase 3, in progress." The screen cut out, and Richard Reynolds stood slowly. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He simply walked out of the hall, flanked by federal agents waiting at the exit. The man who had built an empire on secrets had just watched it fall, brought down by the girl he once tried to erase. Outside, the world was already watching. But inside, Amara turned to her siblings, her voice low. "Now that it's out there, he won't stop coming." Chris nodded. "He won't. But neither will we." Elizabeth gripped their hands tightly. "We're not hiding anymore." The fallout from the press conference was instant and thunderous. Within hours, every major media outlet had broadcast the footage of Amara and Elizabeth revealing the Gemini project. Social media exploded with hashtags like #SunshineTruth, #AmaraCollins, and #ReynoldsFiles trending globally. The stock price of Reynolds Corporation plummeted by 40% in a single day. International watchdogs launched inquiries into the company's international ties, and child welfare organizations flooded the hotline the Sunshine Memorial Foundation set up within minutes of launch. But behind the scenes, the storm was just beginning. 2 days later, in a private mountain estate deep in the Catskills, Amara, Elizabeth, Chris, Olivia, Matthew, and Sarah gathered in what had become their makeshift war room. A corkboard on the far wall was cluttered with photographs, timelines, decrypted files, and names, some crossed out, some circled in red. Richard Reynolds' network was vast, and even with his arrest, Many of his shadowboard allies remained free, powerful, and angry. "I don't trust that it's over," Olivia said as she poured tea with shaking hands. "Your father didn't build this alone. There are too many people invested in keeping the past buried." Chris nodded grimly. "Which is why we have to dig deeper, fast, before they regroup." Amara stood near the fireplace, holding the flash drive Elizabeth had given them weeks ago. On it were hundreds of confidential emails, contracts, and encrypted folders from Richard's most secure digital vaults. But one file remained locked, Gemini_Omega.mp4. "The password hasn't cracked yet," she said. "But I think we're close." Matthew stepped forward. "We still have this." He placed an unmarked manila envelope on the table. It had arrived that morning, no return address, just Amara Collins scrawled in precise cursive. Inside was a single burned photo. 3 children. In hospital gowns. One clearly Amara. Another unmistakably Elizabeth. And a boy. Older. Sharper features. Gray eyes. On the back the words, "Gemini is not 2. The third is still waiting to be called." Silence fell like a weight. "A third sibling?" Elizabeth whispered. Chris leaned forward. "Or another subject of the project. Maybe someone who knows more than any of us." Amara's eyes narrowed. "I need to find him." Chris's phone buzzed. He checked the screen, frowned, then answered. "Yeah." Pause. His expression darkened. "How long ago?" Another pause. "Send me everything." He hung up. "Richard's disappeared," Chris said. Everyone froze. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, her voice tight. "They were transferring him from the detention center in Virginia to federal custody in D.C. The convoy was hijacked. The agents were found sedated outside a service station." Amara's stomach dropped. "You think he escaped?" Chris met her gaze. "No. I think someone got him out." Elizabeth clenched her fists. "Someone who still needs him. And now he'll come for us," Amara said. "He can't let this story finish." That night, while everyone else tried to rest, Amara sat alone in the garage where she and Matthew had first read the microfilm. The silver ring on her finger, her symbol of rebirth, felt suddenly heavy. She plugged in the flash drive, opened the encrypted folder, and stared at the password prompt. Her mind flashed back to something her mother used to say whenever Amara doubted herself. "Your name has meaning. Your name is the key." She typed, "Lily Elizabeth Amara. Invalid." She tried again, "Collins Reynolds Sullivan. Invalid." She closed her eyes, then typed once more. "Family is who stays." The folder unlocked. A video began to play. The screen flickered with static before a grainy handheld camera view appeared. It was Richard Reynolds, younger but unmistakable, sitting behind a long steel table in a sterile room. 3 small children sat opposite him, Amara, Elizabeth, and the gray-eyed boy from the photo. He smiled, eerily calm. "These are our finest," he said into the camera. "Project Gemini, Phase Omega. One for the public, one for the shadows, and one for the contingency, our insurance policy." The screen zoomed in on the boy. Subject, Elijah Gray. Trained off-grid. Intelligence off the charts. Psychological obedience tests show 99.2% compliance. Backup in case both primary assets become unmanageable. Amara paused the video. The name hit her like a hammer. "Elijah," she whispered. She remembered it now. Barely a flicker, a memory so deep she thought it was a dream. A boy who used to hum lullabies to her in the dark corners of the Sunshine Nursery, when the lights went out and no one came to check on them. He had called her Lily. The next morning, Amara made a choice. "We have to find him," she told the others at breakfast. "If he's alive, if he's out there, he's part of this." Chris nodded. "Agreed. If Richard got out, then Elijah might already be in play." Matthew looked up from his coffee. "How do you plan to find someone who's been erased?" Elizabeth stood, opened her laptop, and typed something quickly. "Because I know where the Huntington family trained assets like me. There was a secondary compound in Arizona, under the name Prometheus Development Institute. It was abandoned 5 years ago. But if Elijah was a contingency, that's where they would have kept him." Chris grabbed his coat. "Then that's where we go." 2 days later they arrived. The Arizona sun beat down on the crumbling facility, long since boarded up and reclaimed by sand and weeds. But when they broke in, the old servers were still humming, powered by solar panels long forgotten by regulators. Amara walked into a side room. Her flashlight caught a faded mural on the wall. 3 children holding hands under a painted sky. On the far side of the room, a small desk. And on it, a note. "Lily, if you found this, I'm waiting. You showed the world who you are. Now it's time I do the same. Beneath the note, a silver ring, etched with the letters L.E.V. Elijah. Amara closed her hand around the ring, her voice steady. He's alive. The desert winds howled outside the abandoned Prometheus compound, stirring sand into ghostly patterns across the floor as Amara stood silently, Elijah's silver ring pressed tightly in her hand. The initials, L.E.V., shone faintly in the dim morning light filtering through cracked windows. For the first time in weeks she wasn't afraid. She was ready. Chris, Elizabeth, and Matthew joined her beside the desk. No one needed to ask what the ring meant. They all knew. He's out there, Elizabeth murmured. And he's been watching us. Chris looked toward the desert horizon. Or maybe, protecting us. Matthew knelt by the base of the desk and pulled open a small rusted drawer. Inside was a faded map marked with a single red X, coordinates in Nevada. A handwritten line next to it read, Phase Omega, Reawakening Point. Chris's phone buzzed. He glanced down, an encrypted message from an unknown number. If you want answers, come alone. The others are in danger if you don't. Coordinates match. E.g. Elijah wants to meet, he said slowly. But only me. Amara stepped forward immediately. No, that's not happening. Chris shook his head. He's right. If this goes wrong, you and Elizabeth need to survive. You're the reason this entire thing was exposed. Without you, I'm not the symbol anymore, Amara snapped. I'm a person. I'm your sister. We go together. Elizabeth placed a gentle hand on her arm. She's right. If we're ever going to stop this, we stop running. We stop being pawns in someone else's game. Chris looked at them both, torn between fear and awe. Then he nodded. All right. But we do it on our terms. That night, under a cloak of darkness, they drove out into the Nevada desert in 2 unmarked SUVs. The coordinates led them to an abandoned airstrip long lost to time, a rusted metal hangar with a broken control tower and nothing but silence. A lone figure stood waiting, tall, dressed in dark gray. His hair was cut military short, his stance unnaturally still, but his face, Chris recognized it instantly. Elijah Gray, he said, stepping forward. Subject Omega. Elijah smiled faintly. Christopher Reynolds. Subject Alpha. It's been a long time. Amara stepped beside her brother, and when Elijah's eyes met hers, something inside him cracked. The calm shattered. He took a small step forward, breath catching. Lily, he whispered. Amara's eyes welled, but she didn't cry. She reached out slowly, placed the silver ring in his palm. I remembered your song, she said. Even when I forgot everything else. Elijah's hand trembled as he closed it around the ring. I wasn't sure you'd make it, he whispered. But you did. You all did. Chris narrowed his gaze. Why contact us now? Elijah looked out at the stars for a long moment before answering. Because Richard Reynolds isn't finished. You thought exposing Gemini was the end? That was just the beginning. He turned to face them fully. He had another program, Orion Protocol. Coded to activate if Gemini failed. Instead of heirs, it's reclaimers, people bred to destroy everything linked to the truth. He pulled out a tablet and handed it to Elizabeth. On the screen, live feeds of the Sunshine Memorial Foundation campus. Dozens of children playing, volunteers walking, Matthew's new mechanical training center. There's a sleeper agent already planted at the foundation, Elijah said. He's waiting for a single signal. When it comes, he'll wipe it all out. Amara's blood ran cold. They're targeting the kids? Elijah nodded grimly. And every journalist, whistleblower, donor, and staff member who's helped you since the conference. Elizabeth's voice dropped. How do we stop him? Chris stepped forward. We disable the signal. Elijah nodded. There's a satellite transmission point still under Richard's control. Hidden inside a dummy tech company in the Adirondacks. If we take that out before the signal goes out, the sleeper never activates. Amara stared at Elijah. And you're sure this will work? He looked at her, the boy who once sang lullabies now fully grown, scarred by training and lies. I was bred to be the contingency, he said. Now I choose to be the protection. They moved fast. 2 days later, with help from Olivia and Sarah coordinating from the Catskills base, the team reached the hidden transmission site. The facility was disguised as a solar data hub, its security guarded by ex-military private contractors still loyal to Richard's offshore accounts. But Elijah knew every pattern. Every blind spot. Every override code. Inside the main server room, Elizabeth uploaded a virus Elijah had written in secret. one that would permanently disable the signal chain controlling Orion protocol. As the final file was executed, Amara placed a single message into the system's outgoing archive. Read. To every child still being watched, there is a light. Keep going. The moment the transmission hub shut down, alerts flashed across encrypted comms across the country. Those still loyal to Richard's cause scrambled, confused. But the signal never came. And the sleeper agent, buried deep in the foundation, never activated. Instead, he was quietly detained by federal agents the next morning, based on an anonymous tip from a source only listed as Omega Redeemed. A week later, at the newly rebuilt Sunshine Memorial Center, a second ceremony was held. But this time it wasn't about exposure or revenge. It was about rebuilding. About peace. Amara, Chris, and Elizabeth sat side by side, all wearing the silver promise rings. Olivia and Sarah shared the front row, tears in their eyes, watching the family they'd fought so hard to protect finally take their place in the light. Elijah stood at the edge of the stage out of the spotlight watching quietly. He wasn't ready to speak yet. But Amara found him after, wrapped her arms around him and whispered, "You're home now." In the weeks that followed, the Silver Promise Initiative expanded into 3 new states. Matthew's vocational program graduated its first class of mechanics, and Elizabeth spearheaded new federal legislation to ban all private genetic experimentation on minors. The ruby ring that once marked Amara as a hidden weapon was permanently placed in a museum exhibit titled, Relics of Silence. What Power Tried to Bury. Beside it, in the glass case, a note written in Amara's careful handwriting. We were born into a lie. But we chose the truth. We were made to be forgotten. But we chose to remember. And underneath, carved into the plaque. Family is not who creates you. It's who chooses you. 1 year later, on the anniversary of the day she helped fix a broken car on a dirt road, Amara Lily Collins stood before a new group of foster children, children just beginning to understand their own worth, and said, "I didn't change the world because I was special. I changed it because I stopped when someone needed help. Kindness is the crack that breaks every empire of cruelty. You have that power too." They applauded her like a hero. But Amara knew better. She wasn't a hero. She was a sister. A survivor. And now, finally, she was free.